Qualitative Study of ADDIE Participant Perceptions by Jessica Buch, Nathan Bullock, and Amy Sluis. The purpose of this study is to understand perceptions of problem-based learning as it leads to improved online course design and delivery for the faculty members at Lone Star College. At this stage in the research, their perceptions will be generally defined as how they feel about the effectiveness of the course design and how easy it would be to implement in their own subject areas. By studying each of the participants' experiences and knowledge acquisition through the videos and interviews, this study will help bridge the gap between pilot and full implementation in the fall. Ultimately, their voices and experiences will lead to direct change and improvement in our next iteration. Our research project seeks to answer the question, what was the participants' perception of knowledge acquisition through the lens of PBL versus traditional training formats? We want to understand how the participants' perceptions of the course impact their understanding of how to design online courses in the future. Our sub-questions are, what was the most valuable learning activity, and how effective do they consider PBL to their learning? We will explore these research questions by way of observation of students engaging in the course via video and through conducting participant interview. The overall goal of this qualitative study is to really understand our participant perceptions. Because we are focused on our participants, we are using an observation of students engaging in the training, as well as a participant interview to gain insights. It is important to note that Nathan and myself are both designers and instructors in this training that is being observed, so we do have our own biases that we bring into this process. However, Jess provides a balance for our biases as she is an observer and neutral in this project. In our study, each of the three of us bring our own paradigm, identity, and impact to the qualitative data being collected. Jess writes, I find myself looking through the constructivist paradigm in this course as well in my daily work life. I adhere to the concept that there is not an objective reality that can be known, but that students and people in general construct their knowledge rather than discover knowledge. From that paradigm, I look to the study's participants to inform which areas we should further investigate, because they have constructed their own understanding and perceptions of the study based on their experiences. The qualitative methods used in this paradigm align with the data collection we are planning for this project. We will be using observations and interviews to gain a better understanding of the reality the participants have constructed throughout the course of the project. Jessica serves as an observer and researcher and provides a neutral balance to this qualitative study. Nathan writes that he is open to change given his newness to the concept of qualitative research paradigms, but currently he subscribes most closely to the constructivist paradigm. This is reflected in the assignment through the hermeneutic and dialectic approach to the research. The inquiry aim, from Nathan's perspective, is to further understand the student's experience in the course. Observing, analyzing, and coding the observation and interview allow for reconstructions coalescing around consensus. Nathan serves as a participant and a researcher and is an action-seeking stakeholder. Finally, myself, I have a participatory paradigm in this study. I rest on this paradigm as my focus is always on collaboration and participation of both participants and researchers. As researchers in this study, we empower the needs of our participants by giving them an actual voice and narrative in the data we collect. As Lincoln et al. Explained, participatory paradigms move past the interpretation and the understanding of participants onward to an action. This study will not end with recommendations, but with action. The goal of the study is just not to gain understanding, but to evaluate our current course, redesign the training to address any issues identified, and actively incorporate our data to produce and implement a new and improved version this fall. I serve as a participant researcher, and like Nathan, I'm an action-seeking stakeholder in this.
Let's talk about the method a bit. We were fortunate to have access to 7 of Amy's colleagues at Lone Star College in Texas. Most of them are in the art history department or ESL team, and all of them had taken the course that Amy and Nathan had built. So our initial plan was to conduct a discussion and interview online, and thankfully it worked. So the goal of the observation was really to get an idea of how they felt about the design phase of Addie and the instruction they received. And then for the interview, we really wanted to get a high-level overview of the process with one of the participants. Well, first looked at the observation experience. The goal was really to understand how the participants will use the design phase in moving from face-to-face learning to online course delivery, and to deepen the understanding that they have of the design phase and technology, and then for us to understand how they would use technology within the design phase. So the participants used Flipgrid for online discussions, and you can also leave chat responses. So there were multiple views and multiple responses via chat. And it was really interesting doing the field notes because Nathan and I were observers, while Amy had a piece in there where she participated as a researcher. And it was a really interesting takeaway how listening to people who weren't very familiar with instructional design really come up with some practical applications. We were able to coordinate our schedules with one of the participants, and the real goal of interviewing him was to understand his perception of the course and to gather some recommendations for future iterations of the course. My real goal was to put him at ease and use responsive interviewing. The interview guide we created, we had 10 planned questions, and we really wanted to cover those areas. As I worked through the questions that we had, I did ask some follow-up questions to clarify his responses. And it's funny, when you get into an interview situation and you're engaged in conversation, you do, or I do, unintentionally modify some of the questions. And it was probably in an effort to not sound so stilted. But after reviewing it there definitely was a possibility that I led him to some conclusions. I did use some statements in order to set him up for the following questions, as Patton recommends. Lastly, Amy earlier mentioned how we had considered our paradigms, identity, and biases. And to help ensure the quality and vigor of this research, Amy, Nathan, and I did some group and personal reflections on how those impacted our interpretations of the results of the observation and the interview.
Our major findings were that first, Flipgrid was an engaging way to present problem-based learning, but there were opportunities for improvement. Particularly in the interview, the participant suggested better transparency on the amount of time allotted to each video recording, for example. Secondly, the final project seemed the most useful problem-based learning activity. Qualitative data suggested that it tied the instruction together and engaged participants in a real-world application of concepts in the course. Third, there could be a need for further refinement in other problem-based learning activities to make them more relevant and actionable. Fourth, the potential need for two versions of training emerged, with the interview participants suggesting one version for participants developing a course from scratch, and a second version for those converting from an in-person format to an online format. Perhaps most prominently, the participants suggest several times the need for a database of best practices from other course participants. This would allow for idea exchange and sharing between faculty, even during the relatively short time frame of the instruction. This could be particularly helpful given the asynchronous nature of the course. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to our presentation. We look forward to your feedback.